Welcome to the Future of Health Network. This is News Hour with Dr. Sarah Zaldivar. We are going live every week with the latest real health and nutrition headlines that you should have heard about. In today's headlines, we have Aldi announces expansion of over 1,000 plant-based products by 2024. Move over Ozempic, new obesity drug Mounjaro is hailed as revolutionary. Erythritol is linked to heart disease, and metformin may not be the fountain of youth after all. We start with Aldi's expansion to over 1,000 plant-based products by the year 2024. Aldi's latest nutrition report states, and I quote, "We are focusing not only on reducing the small quantities of animal-based ingredients in our products, but also on consistently expanding our vegan range." Aldi currently offers over 700 vegan labeled products. In light of this development, I think we should all remember that vegan diets cause multiple nutrient deficiencies in addition to being associated with stunted growth in children. This is something we reported on in our last episode. Some examples of nutrients completely absent in vegan diets include vitamins B12 and K2 and even cholesterol. That's right. You need to get cholesterol from your diet because our bodies can only supply up to 80% of our cholesterol needs. And so the rest has to come from animal fat because cholesterol, by definition, is exclusively found in animal foods. And for that reason, on a vegan diet, you will struggle to optimize for your cholesterol needs. And this becomes a problem since cholesterol is the building block for vitamin D and sex hormone production. Additional nutrients that are absent on a vegan diet include the amino acids taurine, creatine, and carnosine. All these nutrients are being recognized for their growing importance to our health. For that reason, interest has peaked lately in the carnivore diet as a way to repair the damage from plant-based diets. The carnivore diet is actually the diet that we ate for the vast majority of our existence as a species here on Earth. Skeletal remains of our carnivorous ancestors reveal that they were taller, they had denser bones, bigger skulls to accommodate for their larger brains, and they had wider jaws, which allowed enough space for all the teeth, and so there was no misalignment of the teeth. It wasn't until the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago that humans shifted towards a higher plant-containing diet. It is well documented, however, that humans have paid a very heavy price with this transition towards a more plant-based diet after the agricultural revolution. Another important caveat in comparing vegan versus carnivore diets is the sugar and carbohydrate content on vegan and plant-based diets. Research has been booming lately with regards to the highly addictive nature of sugars, and we have even reported that in our News Hour episodes. Study after study is providing evidence that sugar is not only more addictive than cocaine, but even more addictive than heroin, and by a large margin. This is why it is alarming to see the rising popularity of vegan and plant-based diets, given that it is extremely impossible to not have high amounts of carbohydrates and sugars on those kinds of diets. Even complex carbohydrates like the quinoa and the rice break down to sugar almost instantaneously and lead to blood sugar imbalances, which are very strong triggers for the consumption of more sugar. And those blood sugar imbalances trigger sugar addiction and binge eating behaviors. In addition, the rate of sugar addiction tracks very closely with the rate of overweight and obesity in the United States. To illustrate how eliminating sugars from the diet can cure a decades-long battle with food and sugar addiction, I'm bringing in Serena to share her story with us of healing her binge eating disorder and 37-year battle with sugar addiction by adopting a carnivore diet. Hi, Serena. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Can you elaborate a little bit about the carnivore diet, your experience on it, and how it helped heal your decades-long battle with food addiction?
Sure. For me, it actually started years and years ago. Like you said, decades. I was 12 when I bought my first diet pills and started kind of watching what I ate. So that was 37 years ago because I'm 49. I come from a family where my father was a cocaine addict. My mom was an alcoholic. My sister was anorexic and bulimic. There were so many things going on in my life. And so that held on for me, the food issue, until recently until I started carnivore. And I would go through periods of binging and purging, and then I would go through periods of just binging and then restricting myself. I would punish myself with, a junk food day of popcorn and potato chips and, all kinds of things like that. I would even binge on baked potatoes. I mean, there were lots of things that I would eat that didn't make me feel good. But then I would punish myself afterwards. Mostly it was carbs that I would, binge on. And then I would punish myself afterwards by fasting for 2 or 3 days, or eating only lettuce for 2 or 3 days, or I would go on a juice fast. But it was all like in the name of health. Like I would have those bad days, but then I was really, really trying to be better. I was like the health nut in every crowd that I was in, except for the days where I was binging and eating lots of chocolate and lots of potato chips and things like that. But generally, just in our crowd of people, I was the health nut always. I was always on some sort of new, whole wheat diet or a juice fast, or, being vegan for 6 months, or I was always the healthy one. But inside, I struggled every single day. It was all about food for me. We still go places that remind me of the way I felt when we were there 3 or 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. And so many things that we do revolve around food and what we're going to eat. Even going to a theme park, that whole thing revolves around the food that you're going to eat when you're there, and which restaurants you're going to eat, and everything revolves around food. So for somebody with some sort of food addiction or eating disorders or disordered eating, it's like a nightmare. Every day is like a nightmare for somebody who lives that kind of life. And I do relate it to being a drug addict or an alcoholic. I know people have a really hard time believing that, but for me, I can't imagine that giving up drugs or alcohol could ever be worse than giving up sugar was. And the problem with having that food issue rather than a drug or an alcohol issue is that food is a necessity. Food is everywhere. You don't go to a homeschool group meeting and there's cocaine and alcohol there, but we go to a homeschool group meeting and there's food there. You go to a family gathering, most families don't have that kind of stuff lying around, but they've got food, and most of it's food that's not fit for human consumption, that we shouldn't be eating, and that are highly addictive. And let's be clear, if you have ever polished off a bag of Lay's potato chips or a bag of chocolate candy from start to finish in like one day, you have a problem, and you are a binge eater, and you do have an eating disorder. And most people in America and, the civilized world have problems with these foods because they are so highly addictive. And so for me, when I started carnivore, it was coming off of Weight Watchers, because I was always on some sort of carb-filled Weight Watchers diet or some sort of juice fast. And I have this weird post-COVID issue that makes things taste and smell rotten. And so I was dealing with that. And the only thing that tasted good was sugar. So that just was validation for me that those foods are okay to eat. So my birthday weekend of 2021, in May, my girls have a gluten-free baking business. They made me some of my favorite cupcakes. I told them to double the batch because that's where I was around that time, my 48th birthday, and I was losing it. And I ate 20 cupcakes in 36 hours. And that's a problem.
Cupcakes in
20 cupcakes with homemade buttercream frosting, best cupcakes in the world. I ate 20 of them in 36 hours. I would, it's not, binging isn't about sitting down at the table with a table full of food and shoveling it in your mouth. For a lot of people, it's about walking through the kitchen and seeing the cupcakes and picking one up and eating it. And then an hour later, you're walking through the kitchen again, you grab another cupcake. It's like, it's not, I know people have this image in their heads of what binging is like, the overweight guy sitting in the middle of the room surrounded by food but that's not always what it looks like. Sometimes it looks a lot more innocent than that, because it literally is just walking through the kitchen and taking a bite or picking something up every time you walk through the kitchen. And before you know it, you've eaten the whole thing. So I think that's important to note too, that it's not always about being a pig, and being this, gobbling, shoving things in your mouth. It's not always like that. And it seems very innocent. I never thought that I was a binge eater until after and looking back on it. So anyway, I ate 20 cupcakes in 36 hours, and I woke up on Monday morning and said, okay, so if I'm not going to eat sugar and carbs anymore, and I can't eat fruits and vegetables because they taste and smell rotten, what does that leave me? And that led me down the path of, I can eat this one particular steak fresh off the grill, but not refrigerated and reheated. I can eat this one particular hamburger. So can I just eat steak and hamburger for a little while this smell and taste issue heals? And found lots and lots of people in the community. I didn't know it was called carnivore, till like the end of that first day. And I was like, what? This is a thing? I had no idea. And so that's what started it for me. And I just started absorbing information every day in and day out. I had my AirPod in. I was listening to YouTube videos. I was listening to podcasts all day long, trying to figure out what this was and how this is possible. And it wasn't honestly until about 6 months in one day I read about the difference between being an abstainer and a moderator. A moderator can have one Oreo. I've never eaten one Oreo ever. A moderator can have one cupcake or half a cupcake and be done. Let me tell you something, I have never had just half a cupcake. I see people take 2 bites of a cupcake and put it down, and I'm like, what is wrong with you?
I know. I
Like
don't understand it.
yeah, I was never like that. And so, it's really fascinating when you start to learn. But an abstainer can't have any at all, or they want all of it. And so that's who I was. So when I learned the difference between an abstainer and a moderator at about 6 months in, it was like this eye-opening moment for me. I was like, I'm better. I'm not sick anymore. I was sick for 37 years. I had eating disorders and disordered eating, and I wasn't sick anymore. It was in that moment that I realized I'm an abstainer. This is a thing. There are two different kinds of people in this world, and I'm this one. And that's why I'm better, is because I've been abstaining from it for the last 6 months. And then I just kept having these light bulb moments, like, over the next few weeks, like, oh my goodness. And that's when I realized that for the first time in my life, I was free from the shackles and the chains of my eating disorders and disordered eating. And the feeling that food freedom, even though many people will say carnivore is restrictive, it is actually the least restrictive diet I have ever done as far as how I feel. Like when I was juice fasting, when I was vegan and I was vegetarian and I was on Weight Watchers and I did the cabbage soup diet, when I was doing all of those things, I felt restricted. I do not feel even this much restricted on the carnivore diet. It's really amazing what it can do for you.
And do you think that that's because you no longer have cravings because you're not ingesting a drug like food, which is sugar, which has been proven to be more addictive than heroin, at least in rodent studies?
Yeah, I do think that that's part of it. And, people will say everything in moderation, but you don't give a cocaine addict a little bit of cocaine. You don't give them cocaine in moderation. You don't give an alcoholic alcohol in moderation. And I think that's the point that so many people miss in that, is having a little bit makes you want a lot. And there's almost never any turning back. Like for me in the past, anytime I went off of a juice fast or any other kind of diet plan for Mexican food, because that's my thing. Anytime I ever did that, it was like it would take 2 weeks to get back on track. Like there is no in between for somebody like me. I'm an all or nothing kind of person. And so I'm either all in or all out. And you can't give me just a little bit of something with sugar in it, or I want a lot of it.
How was that transition in the initial week or a couple of weeks on a carnivore diet?
It was really fine. I didn't get the keto flu even, which I was I might have been a little bit tired for a few days, but I didn't have much of a problem. Again, I'm an all or nothing kind of person. So when I set my mind to it and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, it's like it clicks. And then I'm usually pretty good until I'm not. But the carnivore diet has fixed my brain, if I dare go as far as to say that. And I don't ever want to have even one bite of something that is not uh, on the carnivore diet that is going to make me want other things. So that part of it has really not been that hard for me. And I think people don't understand that because everybody feels deprived on any diet they've ever done. But with the carnivore diet, that does not happen. In the beginning, sometimes for some people, once you get past that initial 2 weeks or 30 days, if you can make it and do it one day at a time, it doesn't have to be the full 30 days. You have to, in your head, look at it one day at a time. If you can make it that far, you won't even want that stuff because you're going to feel so good. You won't want to put that stuff back into your body.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Serena, for sharing that fantastic transformation with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now to another recent development. A new obesity drug is being hailed as a revolutionary advancement in the treatment of obesity. While Wegovy and Ozempic, which are the brand names for semaglutide, have taken the world by storm, a new anti-diabetic drug, Mounjaro, known generically as tirzepatide, is generating all the buzz lately. A study showed that over 20% weight loss occurred in around 60% of participants who took the highest dose of this injectable drug. The Wall Street Journal is referring to Mounjaro as the King Kong of weight loss drugs. And just like its competitor, Wegovy or semaglutide, it carries a pretty hefty price tag of close to $1,000 a month. Mounjaro activates receptors for GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide 1, just like the other obesity drugs that are very popular these days and that we have reported on, which are Wegovy and Ozempic. However, this new drug, Mounjaro, has an added effectiveness because it's also targeting another hormone, which is GIP, or gastric inhibitory polypeptide, which stimulates insulin release from the body. So we have previously covered the dark side of taking these obesity drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic, and we've covered also their side effects, which is increased risk of thyroid cancer, horrible nausea, constipation, and also regaining all the weight back and more the moment you quit taking them. In light of this data, wouldn't it be smarter to mimic the effects of these anti-diabetic drugs by simply cutting out carbohydrates? Wouldn't changing our dietary habits lead to better long-term results in terms of obesity without any side effects? Another major development is a new study linking the non-calorific sweetener erythritol to heart disease and strokes. The study that was published in the prestigious journal Nature stumbled on this finding by coincidence. The researchers were studying what type of compound found in blood might be most associated with heart disease, and the number one ranking compound ended up being erythritol. So they really didn't know what they were looking for. They just wanted to see what kind of molecule in the blood correlated with higher rates of cardiovascular events, and it turned out the number one ranking compound was erythritol, which is found in almost all keto treats, recipes, and foods. Further experiments that exposed blood, platelets, and plasma in a lab to erythritol all showed the increased clotting risk. Unwashed human platelets, erythritol immediately led to increased collagen stickiness, which again, that means increased risk of clotting and cardiovascular events. This new data is interesting in the light of the fact that erythritol has a lethal effect on fruit flies. That's right. Did you know that you can kill fruit flies if you just put them in a jar with some erythritol? As a matter of fact, it has such a powerful lethal effect on fruit flies that erythritol is being patented right now as a natural insecticide. We conclude today's segment with a spotlight on the anti-diabetic drug metformin and its alleged anti-aging effects. What ignited the interest originally in using metformin for longevity was a 2014 study that reported how type 2 diabetics taking the drug outlived those without diabetes. However, research exists that links metformin use with Parkinson's disease and a harder time building muscle in response to exercise. Nausea and cramping are also reported side effects of the drug. In addition, another study that tried to replicate those findings couldn't replicate the longevity effects of metformin. And so if metformin we're unsure of its longevity effects, and if it makes it harder for you to put on muscle, and also given that we know that the more muscle mass you have, you are going to live longer, I'm asking you, wouldn't it be wiser to just focus on building more muscle for life extension? There is a strong positive correlation between total amount of muscle mass and strength and how long you will live. My take on that is it's probably wisest to apply the exercise regimen first, since it's practically free of side effects, and also because it seems that metformin's effects aren't really being reproducible in research, so we're not really sure it actually leads to longevity. Alrighty, that concludes our coverage for this week. I'm Dr. Sarah Zaldivar, and on behalf of the entire cast of the Future of Health Network, I thank you for joining us.